This video made possible by Killer Visual Strategies. Let us tell your story. Visit killervisualstrategies.com to learn more.
Welcome, Marc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, GeekWire, for having me this afternoon. So, as mentioned, I'm Marc Lavallee. I work at the New York Times. We just celebrated our 168th birthday a couple of weeks back. There was cake. And for the first 140 years or so, this is what it looked like. It was just a newspaper. And obviously, we've gone through a tremendous amount of change in the last 20 years. I will show you what that looks like. There we go. Great. And so this is now much more of what the New York Times looks like when you consume it every day. Or at least this is I stole this from our marketing team, and so this is the idealized New York Times person who's doing the crossword in pen while also reading the latest news. But the real opportunity for digital with us has been about, let's see if this, there we go, being able to be with you all day, every day. And so that's not just hard news and push alerts, which, it's also podcasts, it's recipes, it's recommendations, and it's being able to do that from morning through evening, every day of the week. And there are a lot of big changes that have gone into that, but one of the ways that we think about this is really at the individual story level. So if you think of, and this is a little cheeky, but if you think of stories as projects, as code, then we ship about 150 times a day. And every story is an opportunity to try out some new types of techniques to better inform our readers, make it simpler and more comprehensible to understand what's going on in the world. So I'm going to start by just showing a few of these to ground what I mean in less abstract terms. So some of the biggest stories of our generation are things where we try to find all of these new ways to be able to make them more understandable. So something big like climate change. How do we make it personal? How do we show you, using data visualizations and 3D maps, what this means for your hometown and how much hotter it's gotten since you were born? And how do we make that relatable to what else is happening on the planet? How do we take you to places, some of the world's most fragile ecosystems, and actually bring you there through video and maps and photos so that you can see what's happening yourself firsthand and have that type of experience with it. And particularly in breaking news situations, how do we as quickly as possible be able to show you what's going on? So in this case, with the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral earlier this year, being able to create a 3D model that explains what happened and how the fire started and what it burned, instead of you having to read that and then try to build that same mental model in your head. This is something that we were able to pull off in about 24 hours after the fire started. And it took, as you can see at this credit line at the bottom, it takes a village to do this now. Journalism is definitely a team sport. And that's both on the ground in Paris, but then also back in New York. So this is the engine that we've set up in the newsroom of the New York Times over the last decade in particular to really take advantage of all of these new technologies and mechanisms for storytelling. And so what is the role of R&D in that? It's to really look at a lot of these areas of emerging technology and figure out where and how and when and why we would want to apply them to our storytelling in the news cycle. So that we're not doing it too early, but we're also not doing it too late. And so I generally find talking about this and really describing how the team works and what we do is easiest in just showing some of these examples. So I'm going to walk through a couple of examples, one a little bit in depth, and then I'll touch on a few other things to be able to show this. So one area that we've been really focused on for the better part of this year is a technique called photogrammetry. You take thousands of photos of a large scene, and then you can reconstruct a 3D model of that environment. You can move through that model, you can view it on your phone, et cetera. This is a thing we've tried out in a few ways as we've done more augmented reality-based storytelling. In this case, this was the aftermath of a wildfire in California last year. There's a lot of wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes in this deck, so just be warned. And we wanted to be able to show this in a really deep, immersive way, but we didn't yet have the technology to do it. And earlier this year, we made a breakthrough to be able to take one of these scenes and make it possible for people to move around it themselves and really be able to zoom in and see the detail. And we're very excited about this, right? This is definitely us wearing our R&D hats. It's like, okay, we've got this new thing. What can we do with it? And so we're like, can we do a house? Yeah. There we go. There's room in this house. Can we do this in a quick turnaround situation? This was a tornado in Missouri, drone footage. Can we actually show you what this looks like in a way where you can actually move around the house yourself? Yes. So how far can we go with this? Can we do an entire city block? This is in Chinatown in Manhattan. And the answer is yes, but you actually have to go. This is the technique of photogrammetry. You have to take a photo of every single little spot in order to be able to build the model accurately. So this is literally thousands of photos. But we want to make sure we don't drift too far from the core purpose of making sure that this is useful to our storytelling. So another part of R&D is actually working through, and this is a sketch, a prototype. We didn't publish this. Working through, is this useful from a storytelling perspective? And so this is a situation where we're trying to figure out what is the story of this street in Manhattan, and how do we tell that story, and is this useful and meaningful to our readers to be able to move through in this way? And so another aspect of working in the newsroom physically is that when you're developing these capabilities and people know about them, sometimes news happens and you have to respond to it. So this happened right around the time we were working on that Chinatown project with Hurricane Durian, which came up the East Coast and made a direct hit on the Bahamas. So we sent one of the folks from our team along with folks from our international desk and graphics desk, and they produced a piece that's a combination of this drone footage and that photogrammetry technique, so that we can tell one simple story about what happened by taking all of that reporting and putting it together, so that you understand how this neighborhood was decimated and how the Bahamian government isn't going to allow rebuilding. And you can tell the story of individuals, and then with that pen right there, that's bringing in the photogrammetry technique to be able to aid with the transitions. So this is us exploring in real time the right ways to take this new technology and fold it into our storytelling. One of the things about doing this is, in working with these new technologies, we can do the best we can on deadline. And there are other industries also looking at photogrammetry, so filming and games are also using it. And when they create one of these scenes, they can look at this and they can say, well, there's no sky, there's no background, we didn't capture that in the model. Well, let's go put a sky in, and maybe it's like this mattress is in the way, let's move the mattress, right? And they can create these perfect environments. Because we do all of this within the principles and standards of journalism, and in this case, photojournalism, we can't do that. We're not going to, right? We're not going to move this stuff around for cinematic effect. So in real time, we need to be figuring out how we explain that to our readers so that they're not confused by the ways that we bring these new techniques into the mix, and it doesn't make it harder to understand the story. That would work against what it is that we're trying to do. There are a lot of, photogrammetry is a pretty uncontroversial area of emerging technology, I would say. There are a lot of questions like that we need to sort out. There are definitely more controversial areas. Facial recognition is definitely one of those. When we look at that as an area, we don't process that as just a yes or no, we will or won't use it. It's really trying to figure out what are the safe ways that we can apply it to our news operation. And so we did this thing with the royal wedding last year, where throughout the entire process, we had a facial recognition model trained on the people that we thought would be there, so that when you watch the video, you could see in real time that's Serena Williams. But even more importantly, we could answer the question you start to formulate when you see Serena Williams there, which is, why is she there? Right? She was on a flag football team with Meghan Markle. And so in building this coverage that way, we're able to, in real time, answer those types of questions and provide that reader service by applying this technology. And so it's really important to us to work through all those principles. In this case, this is a public gathering watched by billions of people. These are celebrities, no expectation of privacy. We felt like it was a safe use of the technology for us to be able to get our heads around it and really understand how to use it in the service of journalism. But those opportunities for something like this are not just few and far between, but we need to be very deliberate in how we roll out a capability like this. And so that's part of what we do. Even more controversial than that, deepfakes. So we deepfaked a reporter. To be clear, he asked for it. He came into our Slack channel. And so this is Kevin Roos, one of our tech columnists, being matched up with Ryan Gosling. That's where he wanted to start. He wanted to write a story, this was last year, about the deepfakes phenomenon in a way that he could put himself into it to explain what it's like as the subject of this. And so we worked with him, I guess we worked with him and on him in this situation to be able to build this out. And he produced a story where he talked about that process. So his face is too wide to be Ryan, his words, not mine. But as we got to Chris Pratt, and as we got to Jake Gyllenhaal and Jimmy Kimmel, and figuring out how to actually do this, it got better. So this is one of the roles of R&D, and many others at the times now, is making sure that we understand these technologies deeply enough to be able to explain them to our readers. And a lot of that involves that kind of hands-on experimentation. So this whole misinformation area is something where the Times also has an increasing role and responsibility, in my opinion, to do more than just tell the story of what's going on, to actually participate in ways to help combat these issues and other ways to help advance other areas of emerging tech. So 2 ways we're doing that. One is through a lot of these partnerships that we're seeing. This is the partnership on AI. They're running a deepfake detection contest. It's launching later this year into next year, so that as big tech companies like Facebook and Microsoft build out these capabilities to be able to detect misinformation, that's being done in a way that actually works for journalists and others in media, so that we can use these tools as well, particularly in those breaking news situations, so that we're not unintentionally misinforming our own readers. Another angle on this in terms of misinformation is a realization we had earlier this year that news organizations sit on top of a tremendous amount of information about real things that we publish, photos, video, text, et cetera, and that if we can find ways to share that, the provenance of that information, so that it travels around the internet with our photos, our real photos, then there's a way to be able to sort of safeguard the unintentional misinformation that happens out there. I'll show you an example. So here's all of this metadata we have about all of our photos, videos, and text, and things like that. And then this often gets stripped on social media. Someone uploads this photo, it loses its context, or it's just not in the field of view. And this could be a good intention, it could be a bad intention, but without that context, it's easier for people to be misinformed. And this, again, in the good intentions realm, this could be someone like the Prime Minister of France, trying to raise awareness about fires in the Amazon, as he was doing in this tweet, and he used this photo that looks very much like a fire in the Amazon, except you could buy this photo yourself for the low, low price of $19.99. And I don't know exactly when this photo was taken, but the photographer who took the photo died in 2003. So unlikely to be part of this news cycle. It's this kind of thing where someone with good intentions, it's still so easy for them to be able to essentially do the wrong or incorrect thing. That there's a role for the New York Times in helping build the systems and convene all kinds of other publishers around the world to be able to share that metadata that we have so that it can be used in these ways. So I don't want to end on fires in the Amazon. So I want to talk about this basement of photos. We have about 5 million or so undigitized photos in the basement next door to the New York Times building that we refer to as the morgue for some reason. And each one of these photos has, it's interesting, but then also on the back of it, as he flips it, that's the metadata. That's what we have to work with in understanding the rights usage, when it's been used prior, the caption, et cetera. Here's a close-up of that. And so we're undergoing this massive digitization project that's not just about scanning the photos, it's about understanding everything, all of the knowledge that's captured on the backs of these photos, and then also applying areas of emerging tech to understand more about what the photos contain. And so where this helps us is in being able to create entirely new forms of journalism and storytelling where we can tell these stories using our archives that would not have been within reach before because it would have taken years to be able to pull out a narrative. So one way that that's come to life in the past year is a regular print feature we're running called Past Tense. And this is a way of being able to tell these very long-running stories through photography that we're already literally sitting on top of, but be able to do those in new ways. So this is a thing that we've run in print. And a thing that's exciting about that is as we work on all these digital things, it's not just about creating more and more web things. We can do this with the full expression of the New York Times. And so who knows, maybe after all of this internet stuff, we actually end right where we began. So thank you. I think we have some time for questions as well, and it's tough to see, so.
I have a question.
Okay. Great.
Well, that's louder than I thought it was. Where do you see provenance of media and material going?
Hopefully in a good direction where we save the internet. A way that we've been looking at it is that it feels like we're essentially like missing protocols to help make sure that in a secure distributed way, so like maybe blockchain, we are able to use that information in any situation when you're viewing something in your Facebook newsfeed or things like that. To us, when looking at all of the misinformation landscape, it feels like it needs to be like an all of the above approach, in addition to all of the work that folks are doing on the detection side of things to be able to look at something and see if it's real or fake, that if we just are clearer about everything that happens all the way through the process from the moment that something's captured on camera to when you see it on your newsfeed, that's going to help. There's a huge UX question within that of how do you add all of that knowledge in a way that doesn't add a lot of cognitive load if what you are doing is just scrolling through your newsfeed, and so that's one of the big areas that we've been looking into in 2019. Sorry, it's got this guy and then you. We're gonna have to really yell. Sorry,
I'm just curious, who is your main competitor?
What does Netflix say their main competitor is sleep? Which is frightening. This is off the record, right? It's a good question. I mean, it's not I was actually talking to someone earlier today about how it's not other news organizations, right? In some ways we compete on stories as breaking news and things like that, but we increasingly work with companies like the Washington Post. I worked on a project with them for a number of years. And I think as an industry, it's about making sure that we're doing these things and moving forward together. And it's not really, our competition isn't really the platforms either, because we all need to work together. And so in some ways, I would say our competition is apathy. And people who don't want to be curious about the world. And I think there's a public service element to journalism that runs deeply through any news organization and trying to find ways to combat that. So I know that's very lofty, but in some ways I would say that's our sort of Netflix-style answer. Yes?
How does the EU law, the right to be forgotten, impact the New York Times?
That is a great question. We have a lot of lawyers. I don't know what the consequences are there. As a global news organization, we last year had to do a lot to be GDPR compliant, and we were from the outset with that. Yeah, I don't know.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier that technology can help to fighting the fake news compared to the real news that is available in the media to the audience. So usually, a lot of people also feel the media is represent some party's interest. And do you think that technology can kind of become more objective instead of more kind of swing around people's opinions in one way or another by using technology?
Totally. One way that we think about it is that trust can scale. That if you understand where something came from, so this is like the provenance use case, you can decide if it fits with your version or understanding of the truth. I think it's hard to look at something like facts. There are some things that are definitely like irrefutable facts, but there are so many situations and people who just come from very different worldviews and things like that trying to come up with a single codified objective view of reality seems incredibly difficult. And so I think for starters, what we're trying to do is say that at a minimum, if you can at least trust where something came from and you have the ability to assume good intent, then that's going to get us some part of the way there. We're at time, so I don't know. I can keep taking questions until they kick me off the stage. Go for it.
This is fascinating. Thank you. I'm curious if you could talk more about the funding behind the R&D. There's been a lot of news about the journalism industry having some financial struggles. Could you talk more about the New York Times is financing all the R&D and the technology behind? Yeah,
totally. So we have a $10 billion budget, and so just infinite resources for R&D. I think it's like what Facebook and Google have. So we have a long ways to go. The core R&D budget is something that's been around for a while, and we've figured out different ways of using it over the years. And so that funds the core team. And then some of what we do in looking at how to work on some of these more dedicated projects is to find some kind of partnership. And so some of that is through commercial partnerships. We're working on that archive project with Google. And so they've funded some of that work, and also looking at some sort of partnerships through philanthropic channels as well. So This is a little bit further back, so I didn't put it in this deck, but we, in the Washington Post, the example I alluded to a second ago, worked on a commenting platform that we open sourced going back about 5 years, and that was with funding from the Knight Foundation. And so that's us in trying to build out systems that work beyond just our respective organizations, but work for the benefit of the journalism industry, finding ways to be able to fund that work beyond just essentially the internal budgets as well. And so maybe I'll end on that point of how, I think we're very lucky, and this is true of our colleagues within the journalism industry who work in the R&D space, that we have this license and privilege to be able to work. We have to ground this stuff in real business terms, right? And I think one of the reasons why we live in the newsroom is so that we're making sure that we're actually benefiting the core of what the New York Times is, but that we also get to work at the mission level and try to make an ecosystem that's better, not just for our own industry, but for all of our readers as well. So, excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'll be around if you have questions. Great.